Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The lock on the heavy mahogany door clicked shut with a sound like a gunshot, sealing the air in the room until it became a vacuum of pure, suffocating dread. Julian froze, his hand hovering over the brass handle he had just tried to turn, realizing too late that the interview was a farce, the job offer a lure, and the man sitting in the high-backed leather chair facing the panoramic window was not a stranger, but a ghost he had spent 5 years running from. The figure turned slowly, the sprawling skyline of Seoul at night framing him like a god of the underworld, and the ambient light caught the sharp, cruel angle of a jawline Julian had once traced with loving fingers. But the eyes, those terrifyingly familiar eyes, were no longer the warm amber of the boy who had promised him forever. They were shards of frozen gold, hard, dead, and burning with a possessiveness that made Julian's knees buckle. "You're thinner," the man said, his voice a low velvet rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. He didn't stand. He didn't need to. His presence filled the cavernous office, pressing against Julian's chest. 5 years, Julian. 1,825 days. And you didn't think to eat properly during a single one of them. Julian's breath hitched, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "Silas," he whispered, the name tasting like ash and old regret. I didn't know this was your company. I'll leave. I'll just go. Go." Silas Thorne, the newly appointed CEO of Thorne Industries and the ruthless shark of the architectural world, finally stood up. He moved with a predatory grace, a lethal elegance that hadn't been there when he was a university student. "You walked into the lion's den, little rabbit. You don't get to walk out just because you realized you're the meal." Julian backed away until his spine hit the cold glass of the office wall, the drop behind him a dizzying 50 stories. Silas closed the distance, slamming his hands against the glass on either side of Julian's head, boxing him in. The scent of sandalwood, rain, and expensive scotch flooded Julian's senses, triggering a visceral memory of nights spent tangled in sheets, of whispers and promises he had shattered with his own hands. "I have a contract," Silas murmured, leaning down until his lips brushed the shell of Julian's ear. "You work for me now. Exclusively. You live where I tell you to live. You breathe when I tell you to breathe. Try to run again, and I will burn this city to the ground to find you. Do you understand?" Julian looked up, trembling, expecting to see hatred. He saw it, yes, layered over a deep, festering wound. But beneath the rage, beneath the icy facade of the CEO, he saw something far more terrifying. He saw a desperate, starving madness. "Why?" Julian choked out. Silas's expression crumpled for a fraction of a second, a crack in the marble mask, before resealing into stone. "Because you owe me a life, Julian, and I intend to collect." The penthouse was less of a home and more of a gilded cage suspended in the clouds. It was a testament to Silas's wealth and his isolation. Stark, modern, filled with black marble and chrome, devoid of warmth. It was here that Julian found himself installed 3 hours later, his meager belongings from his cheap apartment transported by silent men in suits who wouldn't meet his eyes. Julian sat on the edge of the king-sized bed in the guest suite, staring at his hands. He had broken Silas. He knew that. 5 years ago, Julian had been a scholarship student, struggling to keep the lights on, while Silas was the heir to an empire. Their love had been a secret, a fragile thing blooming in the shadows of the university library and Julian's cramped dorm room. But the Thorne family was not known for its mercy. Silas's father had found out. The ultimatum had been simple. Leave him, break his heart so thoroughly he never looks back, or we destroy him. We will blacklist him, ruin his future, and ensure he ends up with nothing. So Julian had done the only thing he could to save the man he loved. He had staged a betrayal. He had looked Silas in the eye and told him the cruelest lie of his life. "I never loved you. You were just a paycheck, a way to climb the ladder." He remembered the way Silas's face had drained of color, the way the light died in his eyes. Julian had packed his bags and fled the country that night, changing his number, working odd jobs, hiding in the woodwork of the industry, terrified that if he ever surfaced, the thorns would finish the job. He hadn't expected Silas to usurp his father. He hadn't expected the soft, artistic boy who loved poetry to become the viper of the corporate world. The door to the suite opened. Julian flinched. Silas stood there, no longer in his suit jacket. His tie was loosened, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the hollow of his throat. He held a tablet in his hand. "Dinner," Silas said. It wasn't a question. "I'm not hungry," Julian replied, his voice steady despite his fear. Silas walked into the room, the tablet hitting the duvet with a soft thud. He grabbed Julian's chin, forcing him to look up. The touch was firm, possessive, his thumb tracing the line of Julian's lower lip. "I didn't ask if you were hungry. I said dinner." He dragged Julian to the dining room. The table was set for two, laden with dishes that made Julian's stomach clench. Not from hunger, but from memory. Spicy tofu stew, honey-glazed lotus root, the cheap, comfort foods they used to share at the street stalls near campus, now presented on fine china. They ate in silence. The sound of silverware clinking against porcelain was deafening. Silas watched him with an intensity that made Julian's skin crawl. It wasn't the gaze of a lover. It was the gaze of a warden ensuring the prisoner didn't smuggle a shiv. "The design drafts for the Uido project," Silas said suddenly, slicing into a piece of meat with surgical precision. "They're amateurish. You used to be brilliant. What happened?" I haven't designed in years," Julian admitted, looking at his plate. "I've been doing data entry, drafting assistant work." "Because you were hiding," Silas said. "From me." "From your father," Julian corrected, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Silas froze. The knife screeched against the plate. "My father is dead, Julian. He died 2 years ago. I took everything he had. I dismantled his legacy and built my own on top of it. And do you know why?" Julian shook his head, terrified to speak. "To find you," Silas whispered. "I bought the data firms. I bought the surveillance companies. I bought the headhunters. I turned this entire city into a net to catch one specific fish." He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Go to bed. We have an early meeting. You're my personal assistant now. You don't leave my sight. Not for a second." The weeks that followed were a blurring nightmare of psychological warfare. Silas was a tyrant in the office. Cold, demanding, humiliating Julian with petty tasks like fetching coffee or reorganizing files, only to turn around and demand Julian's opinion on multimillion-dollar architectural blueprints, listening to his answers with a rapt, hungry intensity. It was a confusing dichotomy. Publicly, Silas treated him like a servant he disdained. Privately, he moved Julian into the master bedroom, not for sex. He never tried to initiate anything beyond a touch of the hand or a brush of shoulders, but simply to sleep. "I have insomnia," Silas had stated flatly the first night he ordered Julian into his bed. "I sleep better when there's white noise. You breathe loud. Stay." So Julian lay on the far edge of the massive mattress, stiff as a board, listening to the steady rhythm of Silas's breathing, wondering how a man could be so cold and yet radiate such desperate heat. The breaking point came a month later. Silas had dragged Julian to a high society gala. Julian was wearing a tuxedo Silas had bought for him, midnight blue, tailored to accentuate the waist Julian had lost during his years of running. He felt like a doll on display. While Silas was engaged in a conversation with a foreign investor, a man approached Julian. It was Kangdae, a former university rival who knew exactly who Julian was and how far he had fallen. Well, Kangdae sneered, swirling his champagne. "The prodigy returns. I heard you were Silas's lapdog now. Did you finally run out of rich boys to leech off of? Or is Silas just keeping you around for old time's sake?" "A pity fuck." Julian flinched, the insult stinging. "Excuse me," he muttered, trying to push past. Kangdae grabbed his arm, his grip bruising. Don't walk away when I'm talking to you, whore. Everyone knows what you did to him. You're trash. Before Julian could react, a shadow fell over them. The air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Let him go. The voice was low, demonic. Kangdae turned pale as he looked up into the face of Silas Thorne. Silas didn't look angry. He looked murderous. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated. His composure completely shattered. Mr. Thorne, Kangdae stammered, releasing Julian instantly. If you ever touch what is mine again, Silas said, stepping into Kangdae's space, I will ensure that you, your father, and your entire lineage are begging on the streets of Seoul by tomorrow morning. Get out of my sight. Kangdae fled. The silence left in his wake was heavy. People were staring. Silas didn't care. He turned to Julian, his hands shaking as he grabbed Julian's shoulders, checking him over frantically. Did he hurt you? Did he mark you? I'm fine, Silas, Julian whispered, shocked by the raw panic in the other man's eyes. We're leaving, Silas rasped. He grabbed Julian's hand, lacing their fingers together so tightly it hurt, and dragged him out of the ballroom, ignoring the whispers of the elite. The ride back to the penthouse was silent, the tension in the limousine thick enough to choke on. When they arrived, Silas didn't turn on the lights. He marched Julian into the living room and paced back and forth, tearing at his tie, his breathing ragged. Silas, stop, Julian said, standing by the window. It was just words. Why do you care? You hate me. Remember. Silas stopped pacing. He turned to Julian, his silhouette jagged against the city lights. Hate you? Silas laughed, a broken, wet sound. You think I hate you? You trapped me here. Julian shouted, the dam finally breaking. You stalked me. You treat me like a prisoner. You force me to sleep in your bed. That's hate. Silas. That's punishment. It's not punishment. Silas roared back, his voice cracking. It's survival. He crossed the room and collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders began to shake. Julian stood frozen. The great Silas Thorne, the Viper, was crying. Not a polite, single tear, but harsh, racking sobs that tore through his body. Tentatively, Julian approached. Silas. I tried. Silas choked out, his voice muffled by his palms. I tried to hate you. God, I wanted to hate you. When you left, when you said those things, it killed me. But I couldn't do it. Every day you were gone, I felt like I was bleeding out. He looked up, his face wet, his eyes red-rimmed and terrifyingly vulnerable. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a phone. He unlocked it and threw it on the coffee table. Look at it. Julian picked it up. It was a map app, a tracking history, thousands of dots. I didn't just find you a month ago, Silas whispered. I found you 3 years ago, in Busan. You were working at a convenience store. You looked so tired. I almost came to you then, but I was afraid. I was afraid you'd run again if you saw me. So I waited. I watched. Julian scrolled. There were photos. Not creepy photos, but photos taken from a distance. Julian waiting for a bus. Julian feeding a stray cat. Julian asleep on a park bench during a lunch break. I had to know you were eating, Silas confessed, his voice dropping to a whimper. I had to know you were safe. I paid your landlord to fix your heater when it broke last winter. I paid off your mother's medical debt anonymously. I did everything I could to keep you alive without you knowing, because if you knew, you'd leave me again. Julian felt the world tilt on its axis. You paid for my mom's surgery? I'd pay for the sun to rise if you asked for it, Silas said, wiping his eyes aggressively, trying to regain some semblance of control but failing. And then I saw you applying for jobs in Seoul. I couldn't wait anymore. I couldn't watch from the dark anymore. I had to have you here, where I can see you, where I can lock the door and know you won't vanish. That's why you threaten me with the contract? Julian asked softly. Because you think it's the only way I'll stay? Isn't it? Silas looked at him with bleak hopelessness. You don't love me. You made that clear 5 years ago. So if I have to be the villain to keep you, I'll be the villain. I'll be the monster. I don't care. Just don't leave. The confession hung in the air, heavy and tragic. The revenge hadn't been malice. It had been the flailing, toxic, desperate measures of a man who had never healed. Julian sank to his knees in front of the sofa, placing his hands on Silas's knees. The expensive fabric was damp with tears. Silas, Julian said, his voice trembling, I need you to listen to me. Really listen. Silas looked down, his eyes wary, bracing for the final blow. I didn't leave because I didn't love you, Julian said. I left because your father threatened to destroy you. Silas went still. What? He came to me, Julian continued, tears finally spilling over his own cheeks. He said if I didn't break it off, if I didn't make you hate me, he would disown you. He would ensure you never worked as an architect. He would burn your future. I couldn't let him do that. You are the most brilliant man I've ever known. I couldn't be the reason you lost your wings. Silas stared at him, his mouth slightly open, processing the words. The anger, the years of resentment, the calculated cruelty. It all wavered. You lied, Silas whispered. To save me, I loved you more than I loved myself, Julian sobbed. I still do. I never stopped. Every day I was gone, I thought about you. I kept a picture of you in my wallet until it fell apart. Silas let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He slid off the sofa, crashing to his knees on the floor until he was level with Julian. He reached out, his hands trembling violently, and cupped Julian's face. You idiot! Silas wept, pressing his forehead against Julian's. You stupid, self-sacrificing idiot. I didn't care about the money. I didn't care about the legacy. I only wanted you. I know, Julian cried. I know that now. He's dead, Silas said fiercely, his thumbs wiping away Julian's tears. My father is dead. He can't hurt us. No one can hurt us. I own this city, Julian. I own it for you. I'm scared, Silas, Julian admitted. You've changed. You're so hard. I had to be, Silas said, pulling Julian into a crushing embrace, burying his face in Julian's neck. To survive without you, I had to turn into stone. But you can break me. Only you. Please break me again. Just don't leave. Julian wrapped his arms around the man who was now his boss, his captor, and his soulmate. He felt the tremors in Silas's back, the sheer fragility of the man beneath the power suit. I'm not going anywhere, Julian whispered into Silas's hair. Tear up the contract. No, Silas mumbled into his skin, tightening his grip. Silas, Julian warned gently. I'll rewrite it, Silas bargained, pulling back just enough to look into Julian's eyes. The golden gaze was no longer cold. It was molten, burning with a mix of obsession and adoration. New terms. You stay. You marry me. You take half my company. You never sleep more than an arm's reach away from me. And I spend the rest of my life making up for the last 5 years. Julian managed a watery smile. That sounds possessive. I am possessive, Silas growled, leaning in to brush his lips against Julian's. I am a jealous, stalking, vindictive bastard. Are you going to run? Julian looked at the man who had burned the world to find him. He looked at the scars on Silas's heart, scars that mirrored his own. No, Julian whispered, closing the gap between them. I'm done running. The kiss was desperate, tasting of salt and whiskey and salvation. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision of two stars that had been orbiting each other in the dark for too long. Silas kissed him like he was drowning and Julian was air, his hands gripping Julian's shirt, pulling him closer, closer, until there was no space left between them. The penthouse was still a cage, perhaps, but as Silas knocked him backward onto the thick carpet, covering his body with his own, shielding him from the world outside, Julian realized that for the first time in 5 years, he wasn't trapped. He was home. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. Not with venom, but with tears. If you enjoyed seeing the mighty CEO Silas crumble for his love, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments. Would you forgive a husband who stalked you to keep you safe? Or is that a red flag you can't ignore? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,